Susan is an attorney licensed in California and in New York, and has experience in drafting legislation as well as in litigation. Susan has spoken and written extensively on redistricting, publishing 3 opinion pieces on the topic in the Times-Union, Newsday, and the Rochester Democrat and Chronicle in the last 6 months. Susan is a graduate of the University of Chicago and the NYU School of Law. Today, Susan will speak to us about campaign finance reform, a topic of continuing relevance, but never more so than today. Please welcome Susan Lerner.
Thanks so much. Well, campaign finance reform. I think this is a topic that we are all familiar with, and I think it's a topic that we're all going to be talking about a lot between now and November. And quite frankly, friends, I think the situation that we are facing, particularly at the federal level, is so dreadful that we have nowhere to go but up on campaign finance reform. But it provides us with a wonderful opportunity to educate our friends and our families to the problems of the system, because the problems are not our individual candidates or our individual elected officials. Most of them, as you know, are very public-spirited individuals who want to do a good job, but they are trapped in a crummy system. And we are somewhat to blame because we allow this system to continue. Our task this year, when people start to complain about the super PACs and the huge amount of money which is being spent at the presidential level, and I predict we're going to see in some of the congressional races here in New York State, with out-of-state money coming from committees and wealthy endowed PACs with names that don't allow the voters to know who is opposing or supporting particular candidates, that we're going to have a great opportunity to educate family and friends that there is an alternative to this system that everybody is now complaining about, that it does not have to be this way, that we have a responsibility to change the system if we think that it is bad and corrupting, as I know many of us in this room believe that it is. We have models in our own state, we have models in other states, and we need to be persuasive advocates. So we need to understand ourselves. What are the strengths and weaknesses of the alternatives that we are advocating for? And we need to be honest with ourselves and with the public. Campaign finance reform is a worthwhile solution. Is it a magic silver bullet? No. It's not going to fix everything that people dislike about our election system, but it is going to be a strong and essential step in righting what is so wrong in our election system. The things that make people dispirited, the things that make people skeptical. So what are the alternatives that we're looking at? At the federal level, and I'm not going to spend much time talking about that at all, we have reintroduced the Fair Elections Now Act, which is a bill, and I'd like to say that Senator Gillibrand is a co-sponsor. I just found out has gone on this week as a co-sponsor of the Fair Elections Now Act, and that would provide a very interesting public funding system for congressional races, which I think would be an important step forward. We all know that the public financing system at the presidential level is broken. We know that our current president, Barack Obama, elected not to use it, but ran on the promise that he would fix it. And now we're 3 years later, and it's unchanged. But what I want to talk about today really is the opportunity that's available to us here in New York State. This week, Assembly Speaker Sheldon Silver introduced a fair elections bill, a public financing bill for New York State that is modeled on the successful New York City public financing system. The Speaker's bill has a lot to recommend it. I believe it's a work in progress. There are various aspects of it that I think very much will have to be changed. And we at Common Cause and our partners at the state level, the League, NYPIRG, Citizen Action, the Brennan Center, are all going to be working very, very hard to have that bill adjusted and amended so that it lives up to our long-term standards for campaign finance reform. But in order to have an effective public financing system, we have to see the system changed in the way in which the Speaker's bill sets out to change it. We need to lower campaign finance limits, we need to have strong enforcement, and practically speaking, we need to provide a workable public financing system so that good candidates have a fair opportunity to get their word out to the voters, to the public, without having to mortgage their political futures to the special interests, which in practical terms is what our conventional campaign finance system asks our elected officials to do. No matter how honest you are, when your ability to get elected depends on collecting millions of dollars from special interests, there's no way you can be objective. You probably are very objective in the larger picture, but on the smaller things, when a major contributor comes to you and says, here's this little fix that I would like, it doesn't really matter much to your constituents, but it would make a big difference on my issue or on my bottom line. You pick up that amendment, you pass it, and then cumulatively over time, the net impact of those small changes begin to add up and people begin to be concerned. It's no one individual piece, it's not corruption, it's not bribery, it's human nature. We have a responsibility not just to complain about the campaign system, but to actually work to fix it. So what would a public funding system do? What does it, on a New York City model, what does it actually achieve? Is it going to get money out of politics, which we so often hear people say is the ultimate goal? Let's be honest, it will not. Money will never completely be out of politics. You have to have money to run an election. Somebody's got to pay for that. If broadcast time requires money to run ads, if you have to pay the printer and a designer to mail out a piece of campaign literature, as all candidates should do to communicate with the voters, someone's going to have to pay for it. But I am struck with a comment that was made by a columnist for the LA Times 5 or 6 years ago when I was in California, and he very crudely put it in a very straightforward fashion, and he said, somebody's going to pay, and it's either the special interests and the corporations are going to pay, or the voters are going to pay. And who do we want to have paying for elections? Frankly, I believe it's the voters who should be paying for elections, because elections are a public good, and it's a positive thing that we're doing. But we're not going to be getting money out of politics with the New York City matching fund style public funding system. So what is the New York City system? The New York City system, as I said, is a matching fund system. What it does is it provides public money to match private money. And over time, the strength of the New York City system is that while it was a one-to-one match when it started, over time, Common Cause and its partners, Citizens Union, NYPIRG, and the League, and others, have managed to have that system evolve so that it is now a 6-to-1 match. So that means for every dollar that a candidate running for an office in New York City manages to raise from a constituent, they get $6. So that $1 is worth 7. So if you raise $100 from a constituent who has the ability to write that check is worth $700 to you. And the idea is that that is a counterbalance to a wealthy individual or a large corporation or a special interest that can write $1,000 or $2,000 check. The idea is that it is supposed to recalibrate the focus of elections so that instead of chasing after large check donors, the candidate can focus on constituents, can focus on the voters, people in their district, and the small dollar donor. So the question is, does that work? That's the goal. Is it working that way? Well, we have now several cycles since the 6-to-1 match has been adopted. And just this past a few months, there are several studies which have come out. The Campaign Finance Board in New York City issued an analysis of the way in which the system is working. And this past March, the Campaign Finance Institute, a nonprofit organization in Washington, D.C., issued a detailed study of how effective or ineffective the New York City system is being. And what they found is that if the goal of a matching fund system is to refocus the attention of candidates from the large check writer to the smaller donor, it is working. And we're seeing an increasingly large percentage of candidates who are getting most of their money from smaller donors. And an increasing number of smaller donors are coming in. And interestingly enough, before the most recent amendment to the matching fund system in New York City, the public matching funds matched the first $250 that you got from any individual. But the most recent amendment changed that figure so that the match goes to the first $175. So it's interesting to see, is that going to have an impact on the number of people who actually give $175 versus the number of people who give $250? Are the voters paying attention? Are the candidates urging people to give the maximum amount that's matched? And what we saw is a shift, that before the match was made on $175, you had a higher percentage of people who gave exactly $250. But after the amendment, now more people and small donors are giving $175, which means that the public matching fund is working as an incentive, exactly as we hope it would be, for people who can't write $1,000 or $1,500 or $2,000 to actually contribute and be part of the election campaign by contributing the money that they know will be matched. And that's exactly what the Campaign Finance Institute found in its analysis, and their conclusion that the fact that people were now giving a higher percentage of $175 checks, which is not a normal figure that you would pull out of the air by yourself. You might give 100, you might give 250, but why 175? Because that's the amount that's being matched. The other thing that we see in New York City is that one of the goals of a public funding system that we talk about all the time is to encourage more community-based candidates. That we want to open up the ballot, that we want civically minded individuals who have sat at home or in a dinner party or in conversation with friends and said, you know, I don't really think our current elected official is doing the job that I'd like to see done. I think I could do that, why don't I run? If any of you have had that conversation with our current campaign finance system, you know that the next thing that anybody who is involved in campaigns says to you is, how much money can you run? There is a dollar threshold that you have to raise in order to be considered a serious candidate, and it is not chump change. It's a lot of money. And as I think many of you here in this room know, that is a significant disincentive to people who would run for office, who are publicly minded, to actually commit to running for office because of the amount of money that has to be raised. So one of our goals with a public funding system is to open up the ballot to more community-based candidates, to a larger diversity of people. So one of the things that we wanted to look at in judging whether the matching fund system in New York City was being successful was, are we seeing a larger number of candidates? And the answer is resolutely yes. We are seeing many more people running, particularly for open seats, but even a reasonable percentage of challengers in New York City. And when you talk to people about their willingness to run in New York City, and when we have talked to people in Connecticut, after Connecticut adopted a matching fund system several years ago for their state legislative races, one of the first things they say is, because I was able to get public money and I had to face raising less on my own, I was willing to run for office. And quite frankly, it has changed the face of the New York City Council. We have more minority representation that is community-based. We have more representation, we have more women who are willing to run. And I would say that on that second goal of opening up the ballot to more candidates, a public matching fund system is also successful. So while it's not going to get money out of politics, a matching fund system such as the one that we're proposing at the state level is going to have a very positive impact on our general election culture. An impact that I think we at Common Cause and our partners at the League have been talking about finding ways to foster for a long time. An election system which is focused on constituents, an election system which is focused on the ordinary person, not on the lobbyist, not on the large corporation, not on the special interest, whether it's a special interest that's a union or a trade association, but the actual voter. That the voter will feel that they have an investment in our election system, and that the candidate who is ultimately elected is responsible first and foremost to the voters. A place for smaller donations and a way in which to get more people willing to run. What we see in New York City and what we've seen in Connecticut with a somewhat similar system adopted in the past several years is that is exactly what happens. Does it eliminate all corruption? No, we're dealing with human beings. There are human beings who unfortunately will try and game any system. And with public money, there are people who will abuse the public trust. But the key, and this is something we have seen in New York City, is that you have to have strong enforcement. Right now, we've got an embarrassing situation with our city comptroller in New York. If you read the New York papers, I'm sure that you're aware of the situation that the comptroller's campaign staff has been accused of putting in straw donors. That is a situation where you have one large donor who wants to give more money than the maximum, and that money is taken and parceled out to what we call straw donors, people who don't really have the money to write that $800 or $175 check, and they write the check and they're reimbursed. And it's basically a fraud on the campaign finance system. And so this scandal is going on right now. And in today's New York Post, there's an editorial that says, oh my God, the comptroller's campaign defrauded the public, therefore we ought to do away with public funding. Well, people rob banks. Do we then say that we ought to do away with the banking system because it's too much of a temptation for robbers? I don't get it. It doesn't compute to me. The reason why we know that there's a problem with John Liu is because there are strong reporting and enforcement systems in place in New York City. And there were anomalies in his campaign filings that raised questions, that raised flags, and there was an investigation. So it's not the fact that because you have a public funding system, you're going to have problems. It's because you have a well-calibrated public funding system that if there are problems, we will know about it more quickly. And we will be able to nip it in the bud, and we will be able to take corrective action, and those who seek to fool the public and take advantage of the public funding system will be held to account. A situation where with our conventional campaign finance right now at the state level, I can't say we've got, where we have almost no enforcement. So this argument of, well, it's public money and it'll be misused, quite frankly, it's not because we have a public funding system that there are people who are corrupt. It's because we have some individuals who fall down on our expectations in any area. So that's one thing that we hear. And the other thing that we hear most recently, there was a comment that was made by a pretty sensible, a very senior Republican state senator, who said that he didn't really support public financing because it really just helps wealthy individuals, because you can't stop them from putting as much money as they want into their own campaigns, which is true. The U.S. Supreme Court, in its infinite wisdom and total misunderstanding of our political system, has said that individuals can put endless amounts of money into their own campaigns. Fine. But the only chance that a non-wealthy candidate has to keep up with a self-financed billionaire is through public funding. Now, if you follow any of what happened in New York City around the mayoralty race, you know that Mayor Bloomberg put a record amount of money into his own campaign. Close to, I think, over $100 million. His opponent was not self-funded. His opponent was publicly funded. And he was able to keep up, and it was an incredibly close race. Some people say Mayor Bloomberg had to put that kind of money in because the publicly funded candidate would have beaten him otherwise. Candidate Thompson came within 5 points of beating a popular sitting mayor. He would not have been able to do that. He would not have been able to be competitive without public funding. And that's what public funding does when you are outspent. It keeps a good candidate competitive. Again, a positive thing for us as the voters. So what's going to happen next? We have a governor who, in his State of the State, has said that he is going to get public funding. Now, we're hearing different things from him. This is where we all come in. Well, if we don't get it this year, he says, well, maybe we'll do it next year. Politicians are responsive to their constituents. And that's why I want to re-emphasize what I said at the beginning. This election cycle is going to give us so many unique opportunities to educate people and to convince them that we don't have to put up with this bad system. We, as civically engaged individuals, as voters, as citizens, have an obligation to change the system so it lives up to our ideals. We need to be advocates for change. We need to hold our elected officials accountable. We have to be willing to say, Governor, we really appreciate your willingness to champion the system, and we need you to live up to your word. We need to say to our elected representatives, and here in this area you have many wonderful representatives in the state legislature who are very supportive of these efforts. You need to hear from them who are their colleagues who need to hear from constituents. We need to be advocates, we need to be educators, and I believe with this election cycle, we're going to have a wonderful opportunity to convince people that there is a better alternative. Thank you, and I'd be happy to entertain questions. The question is, can I speak to what is going to happen with the super PACs? With the super PACs. And are we expecting to see super PACs in New York State, or is it simply going to be a national phenomenon? Well, I believe we will absolutely see super PAC involvement in congressional races in New York State. We saw super PAC involvement in the 2010 congressional cycle. Karl Rove's super PAC, American Crossroads, came in, and in the last month of the election with $500,000 in ads in order to try and defeat Congressman Hinchey. And there was one other district, which I'm not remembering here in New York, where they also spent significant money. We are going to see this again because although New York is not a swing state in the presidential campaign, there are several congressional seats now which may change from Democratic to Republican, and 5, Barbara points out, and there are several Republican seats which might swing Democratic. And I believe we're going to see a lot of super PAC money in those districts. And for those of you not familiar with the phenomena, the way in which a super PAC participates, if you can call it that, is that they flood the airwaves, mostly with negative advertising, attacking the candidate that they want to defeat. And it's usually a committee with some bland name, American Crossroads, right? What does that mean? It could be pet food for all we know. But it turns out to be a far right-wing political operation that is run by Karl Rove and funded by, we suspect, although we don't know because there are no disclosures, a limited number of far right-wing multi-billionaires who want to see an ideological viewpoint triumph over a multiplicity of different viewpoints. So I think we're going to see super PACs here in several of the congressional races. Yes?
I was really touched and affected by your mention of 2 ideal people. The ordinary person, I think you referred to that as a donor.
Yes.
Distinguished from the zillionaire donor. And also I think you referred to maybe citizen candidates.
Right.
And I think that's a great goal. I, however, have some problems with your group's goals in campaign finance. I take a more libertarian view of it, as I do know many others do. However, I think there's something we both agree on. We need more candidates, we need more donations from individuals, and I think there may be an alternative strategy that might work that wouldn't do any violence to your ideals and might attract a lot more allies from quarters you may not expect. And that I'm referring to is the stranglehold that in New York State, particularly, the 2 parties have on the system. And I would argue the almost fixed game that the Republicans and Democrats have made in Albany and elsewhere, where they control candidates in primaries. I think you can see a lot of reform and a lot of your goals reached regarding integrity and less corruption. I think you would see if you saw a wider range of candidates and less strangling by the party bosses. And I'm just suggesting to you that it might be an interesting strategy to take your resources someday, if you have time, and look if that might be a good use of your time. Because I would argue that some of the goals that you are talking about would be served by the proposal I gave you. I think the stranglehold, the fixed system, call it whatever you want, the closed system that we have in New York, which is fairly unique. I know other states have open...
You're talking about ballot access, right?
Right, open primaries, and also evasion of the terrible primary and party system. I think it would be a very useful goal, and I think it might get you away from some of the constitutional issues, because I can tell you, other than the bosses and the people who depend on them for their jobs, there's very few people who would say the primary system, the party system, is right or it works.
Well, you know, I'm absolutely in agreement in terms of our need to reform the ballot access and primary rules in this state, but we have a chicken and an egg problem in a state like New York, where all reforms have to pass through the legislature. And until we significantly expand the pool of candidates and are able to elect more community-based candidates, we are going to have a legislature which is dominated by the political parties and functions too frequently, unfortunately, as a rubber stamp for the leadership. So it's unpacking the different things. Public financing or campaign finance by itself is not going to fix everything. But we've started with it while we work on things like ballot access. We started with it because we think it opens up a better opportunity for us to pass the kind of reforms that we would like to see in terms of ballot access, in terms of how we actually run our elections. Because right now, we hit a stone wall over and over and over again in Albany when we tried to pass significant election reform. change access to the ballot. Something as simple as redesigning our paper ballots so that they're readable. Oh God, let's not start to talk about that because we'll never go home if we talk about how impossible it is to read our current ballot. Well, that's because of archaic requirements in our elections code that we're having an extremely difficult time getting change. Anytime we talk about changing the elections code, we're up against a brick wall. So we need to get different people up in Albany who are more creative, who are more responsive to their constituents, and are willing to deal with the actual practicalities of running an election that will have a result that is not predetermined by the party. So our goals are the same, but our approach is different. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, you mentioned problems with disclosure for super PACs.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit more about that in the sense that we have as a league, we have a C3 and we have a C4. And as I understand it, I'm not in charge of this, but we have reservations about disclosing donors on a C4 form. This, as I understand it, is the crux of the issue. You have an annual Form 990
Right.
for a C4. The disclosures are limited by huge lag times. Almost every C4 990 that I've looked at, they always apply for an extension because they don't want to disclose any sooner than they have to. So by the time you see the Crossroads Form 990, it's really old information. It's not very politically useful. Why aren't we doing more about that?
Well,
Can you repeat the question?
yes, the question is,
Sorry.
what do we do regarding getting better disclosures for super PACs? And if super PACs are funded by other organizations, what are called advocacy organizations that have a 501c4 tax status, is it practical to require those kinds of organizations to disclose their donors? And isn't there a lag time that would provide information that's useful but way after the election? A lot of good questions. First of all, when an entity decides to make campaign expenditures, they can be regulated on a different basis than the kind of information they provide on their tax forms, which is provided after the tax year is over, because you have a public policy requirement which is different. The public policy requirement, which we hope one day the Supreme Court will recognize, is that we as voters have a need for relevant information in the context of an election, and that is an essential requirement for a vigorous and effective democracy. If we are not well-informed voters because the information is not available to us, how can we exercise our franchise in a responsible way? So there are a lot of different approaches. One of the big problems that we face, and different states are handling it differently, is what we call the Russian doll problem. And it's a problem we see with the Committee to Save New York right now. If you're familiar with the Russian doll, they're called Matrushka in Russian, and it starts with it's a big doll, and you take it, it separates in the middle, and inside is a medium-sized doll, and that separates in the middle, and inside is an intermediate doll, and that separates in the middle, and you have a little tiny one. So what we've seen with these committees, and my time in California gives me more insight into this because we saw this with initiative campaigns all the time, is you get some bland-sounding committee name, the Committee to Save the Bay, whatever, bad choice, the Committee to Save New York, let's stay with that one. And then you want to see who's funding it, and the funders are another set of committees. And so you really have no idea who is really writing the checks. In California, what is done for initiative campaigns is on the advertising, on the mailers that come from any committee, unrelated to candidates, the committee has to list the 5 largest donors who have given checks above $25,000. So if your initiative campaign is paid for by ExxonMobil, then that is the entity that's going to be listed as the largest donor. If your initiative campaign is paid for by 3 wealthy individuals, then their name is going to be on the ad, on the mailer, so that the information is available to you, the voter, when you need it. When you see the message and you say, am I interested in paying attention to this or not? I am a strong supporter of the petroleum industry's efforts to explore further in the US. This comes from ExxonMobil. I'm going to pay attention and find out more. That information is something which we're hoping to see at the federal level, but it's going to take time. The second part of your question was C4 disclosures, and that's something I think that we should talk about in greater detail. Now may not be the time. We at Common Cause have made the determination that since we are asking candidates to be more forthcoming about their donors, we put our donors, our sources of income on our website. There's a pie chart that tells you how much we raise from foundations and which foundations and which donors give us over $1,000 and what percentage of our budget comes from our grassroots, so that people know who we're funded by. Each organization has to make that determination. I would like to point out that the ethics law that was passed last year requires C4s now to file annually who their donors are. So we will have that information at least after the fact. And I'm getting the hook. It's time to let people go back to work. Thank you.
So I want to stay as much on schedule as possible. I had such a good time researching the campaign memorabilia that I purchased for Susan, a book called Collecting Political Americana. And have fun with it, and maybe come back and let us know more about it next year. Okay.
Terrific.
Thanks for being here. We're going to ask our students to come up and speak briefly about their experience. I'm not certain who of our students, among our students, are here. Sam Schneider, Ben Helfin, AJ, Alexander Barbaria, and Luke Murphy. If you're here, please come up. Our first speaker today is Luke.
All right, so I'm Luke Murphy. I'm a sophomore at Rhinebeck High School, and I was exposed to the Students Inside Albany program through one of my teachers there. She showed me a flyer, and she said, "Oh, this would be really good for you. Why don't you apply?" And I didn't really know what to expect. So I sent in the application, and I was accepted to the program. And so in March, we went up to Albany. We were there for a couple days, and it was just a really great experience. It was so much more than I expected it was going to be. We got to hear lectures from all sorts of experts in various fields. So we had people talking about lobbying or campaigning. We had people talking about the Freedom of Information Act and how you can be involved. And everything that we learned, the speakers were just fantastic. We learned so much about how the government works and how we can be involved in the government. It was just a really wonderful experience. And another part of the trip was shadowing our respective assemblyman and senator. And I'm in Assemblyman Latimer's district. So we spent one day, we got to go sit on the floor of the assembly. We got to meet with him and his staff, and it was just really wonderful. They had all sorts of little things to show us with education. They had That's better? Okay. There we go. And so we met with Assemblyman Latimer and with his staff, and we got to learn all sorts about how the assembly works and their legislative process. And just the staff there was so wonderful, they were so helpful, they showed us absolutely everything. And then the following day, we shouted a senator. I would have been with Susie Oppenheimer, however, she was out to with Senator David Carlucci. And we got to, it was really neat to get to see the Senate in action, because when we went to the assembly, they were called into conference pretty quickly. So
tell them why.
Well, they were, I'm not.
Budget.
The budget, yes, that's right. It was the budget week. They had to be called in a conference, so we only spent a few minutes actually watching the assembly, whereas the Senate, we got to see them go through a couple bills, and we saw a hostile amendment opposed, and so we had our Senator Carlucci and his staff were, telling us all about everything, and it was just, I found the shadows personally to be just really fun. I really enjoyed getting to see exactly how they do everything. But just overall the trip was just really fantastic, and I'm just so grateful to have had the opportunity.
Good afternoon. My name is AJ Barbaria. I'm currently a senior at Lucheon High School, and next year I'll be attending the Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland. First and foremost, I would like to thank the local Lucheon chapter of the League of Women Voters for allowing me to go to the Students Inside Albany trip, and I would also like to thank all the League of Women Voters here today for sponsoring the event. It was extremely worthwhile to me personally. I'm currently an AP Government and Politics student, so to be reading the textbook and then actually sit on the floor of the Assembly and the floor of the Senate and see politics happen in action, it was a great experience, and something that me and my fellow classmate Ben were able to bring back to our other students. So even though only 2 students went, we really impacted all the students in our class, so about 90 kids. So it was a great experience for me personally. I got to shadow a representative and an assembly member, and it was an absolutely wonderful experience. And I would also like to especially thank Mrs. Barbara Bartolotti for her amazing lectures. One of the highlights of the event was learning the correct and incorrect ways to lobby, and we did a little role playing, and we learned the correct ways, and we took notes on it and lectured, and we tried it out ourselves, and it was a great hands-on experience, and I would definitely hope that it continues on, and I would recommend it to any of my fellow classmates. Thank you.
My name is Ben Helfand. I'm a senior at Lucheon High School, and I'll be attending the George Washington University next year in Washington, D.C. I really want to thank the League of Women Voters, both the Lucheon chapter and the State League, for allowing us to participate in this wonderful program. It was a truly wonderful experience, shadowing legislators, listening to lobbyists and grassroots organizers. I truly found the lectures to be quite informative, and I learned a lot. I thought the New York State Teachers Union lobbyists who came in really did a wonderful job explaining to us how they perform their jobs and the crucial need for education reform. And also, we had 2 assemblymen who came in and talked to us about running and winning, and that was a really great lecture. I had the privilege of shadowing State Assemblyman Dan O'Donnell around during my State Senate day. He's the sponsor of the Marriage Equality Act, and he explained to me his struggle for passing this truly crucial piece of legislation. So they covered everything else. I just really want to thank the League again for everything.
Did you notice that these are 3 men that were sent out to Albany from the League of Women Voters? Articulate, wonderful, congratulations. I had an opportunity this week to go to Albany, and I really believe that this happened. In fact, I know it happened because of my experience with the League of Women Voters. I again want to thank Nina Cuddy, who I know is here, for first introducing me to the topic of hydraulic fracturing. And in a few years now, because of my involvement in the League and the exposure to that, coupled with my own work as an attorney, I've written and published, etc. But Senator Avella held hearings this week on hydraulic fracturing. It was the minority Democrats in the Senate, and I was invited by his office to go up and testify, which I did. Which was really a wonderful experience because I was a student inside Albany. I was able to see how it works, and they asked questions, and I understood that I was actually participating in government. I was able to educate our elected officials about a topic about which they know, not a lot, but now they will. And you know what? They have a lot on their plate, and it really is up to us with respect to whatever it is that is of importance in our community, in our state, in our country, and on our planet, to be able to communicate that, because our elected officials really do rely on us. Now, Barbara Lifton, who is an assemblywoman in Ithaca, invited Josh Fox, who is the producer director of Gasland, and me over to the assembly, and we had a wonderful experience. I think the students had the same experience. We were introduced on the floor of the assembly, and there's a lovely civilized process where the assemblymen and women come up over and introduce themselves. And I then had the opportunity to sit down with Joe Morelli, who heads the insurance committee there, to discuss the insurance implications and we're going to have follow-up meetings. This begins with the league. It's part of a citizen role. It's what we do as Americans, and I feel very privileged to be a part of it, but really any one of us can be a part of this. We're community, we're parents, we're sisters, we're daughters, etc. And I'm very glad that we're all here today. We've got an election year. My hope is that everybody will vote. We are going to be working with Mamaroneck High School to register high school seniors to vote. The Rhinebeck School has already registered people to vote. I would just close by saying that the success of our country really is dependent on every single one of us, because every voice matters. So go out and knock them dead. Thanks very much.